I'm going to start this one off with a question. Who launched the first rocket into space? I'm going to guess that you're going to answer with one of two possibilities: the United States or the Soviet Union. The Soviets did get the first not man-made object, but man orbiting into space in 1957 with Sputnik. And of course, the United States ultimately won the space race by getting the first man on the moon in 1969 in the form of Apollo 13 with Buzz Aldrin and Neil Armstrong, and left behind to pilot the orbiter, of course, was Michael Collins, the least famous astronaut in history. But what if I told you it was neither of these countries? What if I told you that the first rocket launch into space was actually conducted by Nazi Germany? This, folks, is the V-2 rocket, which was assembled first as the VW-2 rocket, as the Vengeance, which stands for Vengeance Weapon 2, under the command and orders of one Adolf Hitler. Of course, VW-2 means it's a vengeance weapon, which means that it was designed as vengeance for the Allies bombing German cities, which included many of these bombings, in addition to the infamous bombing of Dresden, which is the only bombing in the war in which the Germans held the moral high ground. But going back to the V-2 for a hot second here, they achieved this feat, it was later found out, on June 20th of 1944, when the V-2 rocket that was launched vertically that day was found to have crossed what is called the Kármán line, which is the boundary between space and the Earth's atmosphere. And so, therefore, it was later found that the Germans did indeed put the first rocket into space. Again, with a vertical launch, whereas as a weapon, it's launched at an angle. And the most fatal incident of this particular weapon was launched in February of 1945, and it landed in London and killed about 315 individuals. These weapons were so unique for their time that Winston Churchill decided that he couldn't chance having a freaked out population, so he basically never admitted that his cities had been hit by rockets. Instead, chalked them up to some anonymous missile. But indeed, Hitler made these as vengeance weapons for the attacks the Allies did on his own cities. It was the only purpose. It was not a serious weapon of war per se. It had no strategic importance, but it did have the odd accomplishment of being the first rocket to reach space. As such, by this point in 1944, of course, the war is the tide is starting to heavily go in the favor of the Allies. And so what happened after this point was that both the Soviets and the United States rushed to capture as many of these rocket launch sites as possible. Nazi Germany created about 3,000 of these V-2 rockets. And so the Soviets and the United States rushed to capture as many of these launch sites as possible, and were largely successful in doing so, which eliminated any further damage by Nazi Germany with these rockets. And therefore Adolf Hitler also inadvertently set off the space race, because as the respective opposing allies captured these sites, the technology was captured with them. And in numerous cases, the scientists who created them were imported to the United States and the Soviet Union to help them build on this technology, rocket technology, which was, of course, a brand new thing. The Germans accidentally invented it, but the Soviets and the Americans attempted to develop it. And that is how the space race actually got started. It's because Germany got a rocket into outer space, and the Soviets and the Americans, full well knowing what the post-war scenario was going to be, which of course became the Cold War, were in a race with each other to capture the sites. Now, why did Hitler create this as a weapon? The V2 was one of what would be what he termed as wonder weapons, which were things that were supposed to just completely turn the tide of the war in favor of Nazi Germany. Of course, as evidenced by what I just said, this never happened. The V2 was never a serious strategic weapon in World War II of any kind. It was, again, created as a vengeance tool. It was not going to cause anybody to surrender. It was not going to cause anybody to run from the fight. The V2 rocket was a vengeance tool to make up for the Allies' bombings of cities like Berlin, Hamburg, Frankfurt, and yes, Dresden. And so anyway, Adolf Hitler started the space race. And the V2 rocket meant that Nazi Germany was the first country to get a rocket into outer space. How about them apples? As they always used to say, the more you know. But anyhow, that's it for tonight. Enjoy Friday. Don't do anything stupid. I will see you again tomorrow. Peace out, homies.